Nice. Okay, here we are streaming for today. Today I wanted to kind of go over some things that people on Instagram were curious about. The first sort of video I did was the one about the material and sort of the materialize effect. And then the second, I kind of wanted to go into how I was handling some of the particles and a little bit of the effects that are going on during that. So I guess let's just kind of give a quick recap of what it actually looks like. Nope. So here we have the character. And as I hit K, we're gonna see actually the effect happen. So we hit K, and we get this cool particle effect. And we summon this technology, and after a certain amount of time, the technology goes away. So I kind of wanted to show a little bit what was going on there. So the first thing to kind of understand and take a look at is the system, how I'm handling this. I'm using the ALS system, which is super cool. I really love the ALS 4 advanced locomotion system. And it kind of sucked to set up, not gonna lie, because it was the first time I had ever set anything up like that. So for me, I was just like, oh my god, this is so much. But actually, it was sort of a nice like initiation by fire per se, because I just had to learn so freaking much about animations and blueprints that it kind of like really forced me to get good. Or get better, at least. I wouldn't say I'm good. I know enough to be dangerous is the phrase I always hear. So let's dive a little bit in. Last time I showed that all these are actually blueprints, and all these are attached to sockets that I've placed on the skeleton of this character. So maybe let's go into one of these real quick and kind of do a little bit of a recap. That way we're on the same page. So in the armor, as we can see, all of these are now blueprints instead of meshes. And in here, we can see that we are, at the start, we are turning the visibility off. That was something that is probably a new addition. The reason for this is, even though I had this create material that was transparent, I think that, and there might be a little setting somewhere that I'm missing, but even though it was transparent, it was still casting a really strange shadow everywhere. So the character was just darker, and it looked super strange. So I was like, okay, that's not working. Why don't I just turn the material off? So first things first, start the game, turn the material off. It's just not there. And then it also sets, this might be redundant, but I'll figure that out later. And basically we're creating that material instance that is the dynamic. That's the key right there, is that it's a dynamic material. And we're setting it to this variable. And then we're casting to the character blueprint. And that is this right here. And we'll kind of see how that works out. And then I'm doing a, gosh, I always forget what those are called, but I love using them. Oh yeah, event dispatcher. So binding a event dispatcher, and then we can see that event dispatcher here, event graph. And it's really simple at this point. I'll probably end up doing more as I go along, but we press K, and this will be defined further as like a action input, but right now it's just K. And we fire off that event dispatch, and then in here when we bind the event dispatch, we can actually pull off and do a custom event. And then so that custom event fires off the visibility, it turns it on, creates the material instance, tells it to be the material instance that has the materialize effect. We set that material, say that's the one we want, do a little bit of a delay, and then we go through the timeline. And just to take a look at the timeline, this took some editing to figure out how I really wanted the material to fade in. And the reason I had to kind of edit this is because I wanted there to be a little bit of a play between the way the armor fades in, as like in terms of how it works with the particles. So working out the timing of that, I had to play with this curve as well as sort of edit the timing of the particles. So it fades in on that curve. It updates to that, and when it's done, it sets it back to the original, and then or it sets it to just the original armor. Then after a certain amount of time, we go to this material instance again, and then we fade out. And when it's done with that loop, I think I was just playing with this. This is something I'll play with later, but yeah, I'm setting up sockets to try to handle some of the location of particle effects. So let's get into the particle effects. Oh, excuse me. So the way that I'm handling a lot of the animation timing is with notifies. Notifies on the animations themselves, which is super helpful for very specific animations. So I think that, yeah. Where are the animations? Here are the animations, and I think it's in its own category. Oh, Magick, there we go. Okay, so for this specific magical thing, animation, let me change this mesh too. So as we see here, this is the general animation that's going on during the summoning. And the trick to this really comes down to these little notifies that are happening. This right here is sort of the layering for the curves of the animation, and this is really getting into the ALS stuff. Basically, these curves are allowing for what it seems like, and I could be wrong, but it seems like sort of an amount of add to the transforms of these bones is kind of what it seems like. So you can kind of overdrive the influence of each of these bones in regards to the animation over the sort of base pose. And I'm still learning, still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. But from what I can tell so far, that's what these curves are. But in this specific video, we're talking mostly about these notifies. And these notifies are super useful, and I'm excited to kind of play with them a little bit further to see what other things I can do. But essentially, what you're doing is setting up a little bit of a blueprint at times when they're like these notify. Here, let me add one because there's a difference between, I think it's called a notify state and just a regular notify. So to do that, you add a track and then add notify, and then there's these different types of basically, they seem like little blueprints that you can call at a certain time. And then the notify states are sort of the same thing, just I believe that the notify states are timed. So like as you see here, this is from there to there. So it's playing for that duration, or maybe did I do that backwards? Basically, I'm trying to remember. I'll just add one and see. So notify state, we'll just do executed. Oh, yeah. Notifies are just an on-off or just a yes. It's just like a fire. And then the notify states are for a duration. So basically, let's jump into this one. So you can create a particle system and call to that particle system at that moment. And so for this particle system, I used, let's see. Let's go back into here. The first thing I did, this is something that I've noticed that I think is really annoying, but it's just kind of the way it goes. When doing like smoke effects and stuff, I really didn't like it just being on a flat surface. So I went into Maya and I just created these like really simple circular things, but it has some wave to it. So it's not a flat piece of geometry. Let's turn on the wireframe so you can kind of see it. So it's like a circle, but what I've done is I kind of I just like moved up and down in a circular pattern, the verts, so it looks kind of like a wave slightly. That way when the texture is animating on top of it, it looks kind of like it's a ripple rather than just like this weird flat smoke. So that was kind of the first little trick that I did, and it's super low poly. The main thing for this was to make sure that when UV unwrapping it, that you've got just a perfect circle dead center in your UV space. And that's pretty much what is specifically these ground smokes. So let's solo those out. So as we can see, there's a little bit of geometry movement on this ground smoke. And these ground smokes are from the smoke builder package. And then so I have the material for one of these ground smokes that is overriding on the mesh data. So in this particle, you can add, where is it? Data type, mesh data. And when you add that, you get this node, but you have to first override the material right there, that little tick. And when you do, it gives you the option to apply the this material. What's key about these is their sprites. So if we go into the sprite themselves, it's essentially, it's a sprite sheet. So there's an animated texture and a matrix grid. And to get those to work, you have to set up the, well, that material specifically was doing a lot of the overhead. But the sub image index is a way to get it to animate. And that is pretty much so that you can address the row by rows for the sprite sheets. So if we solo out, if we solo this one out and then get one of the circles, a couple of the circles, oh, that's another smoke. So that's the same thing with that one. I used the mesh data. And then for these, let's turn those smokes off so we just see the sort of animating sigils. So those are the same thing. I took some stuff that I built in Illustrator and animated it and exported them out as a PNG sequence. And then I used Glue-It. So Glue-It is a really good free sprite sheet maker. And you just go to their GitHub. It's Glue-It. Yeah, just search Glue-It, Glue-It sprites, and maybe I'll just put a link in this description for their GitHub, and you download it, and it's just a standalone program. And so once you export out your PNG sequences, you load it into that, and it lines it up into a sprite sheet similar to what we see here, so you can use them in animated surfaces. And so the same thing with these. I didn't like how they were looking when they were flat. It didn't feel like it was around, right? So same thing. Here, let's just do this. Go to the mesh data and find it. And so here, same thing, right? So rather than having this flat surface, just created a really simple dome object, super low poly, made sure that it was UV unwrapped at the top. I had to do a little bit of stretching so it didn't completely stretch on the edge. But basically the goal is to make sure that anything that would fit inside this circle is just right dead center in your UV space. So that's what's handling the mesh of these things. So basically it's just an animating texture on this dome. And in this case, this is another one of those where I had to use the, where is that material? So in the material, there is the sub image horizontal and sub image vertical. So that right there is where you basically declare your rows and columns. So when I built that sprite sheet in Glue-It, I said specifically do 10 by 10. So you got to do a little bit of math, right? You got to say, okay, I want this animation to be 100 frames, so I can have a 10 by 10. So you just have to, in After Effects, when you're animating, make sure you're completing your animation or your loop in 100 frames. That way, when you export it out, you can make a 10 by 10 grid. And so that's what's happening with these with these textures. And so this is just one particle system, right? This is the particle system that has, oops, I was closing those instead of, wake up. Actually, maybe I should take another sip of coffee so I can wake up. Coffee. So yeah, that's what's happening with this specific little cool magic summoning circle thing. And I'm really trying to pull aesthetically from tech. I want it to look like when magic and technology mix. So sort of pulling from the magical circles or sigils, but giving it a tech flair. And so those were just things that I created in Illustrator and then brought them in and just animated them. And that's one thing I really like about Illustrator is when you do it, when you design in layers, those layers sort of import properly into After Effects and you have all that stuff separate. So the next thing to look at is right here. Boom! This is fun. So animation principles, one thing that I really took away from when I was at CU Denver in our animations class, this idea of when you want something really, really powerful to happen, it's counterintuitive. Of course, you want the powerful thing to happen really fast, but actually a nice little stall right before the speed actually gives it power. Because if you think about it, if you're winding up for something right before you swing, you're actually you're going slower, right? There's this buildup and then swing. So to really, really pull from that, I did a little time dilation. So let's open this up. So with the notify states or whatever, gosh, I gotta remember which one is which. This is silly. But what's cool about these is you can do begins and you can do ends, right? So this says, what do we override? You create a little override. And then, so right here, there's the different overrides. The two that I have already used, so they're not in this list. But if it wasn't, you'd have receive notify begin and receive notify end. So basically what's going on here is when it begins, we set a global time dilation to this speed, then we return this node. And then when it ends, we put it back to regular speed. And then that way, in this animation, I can control exactly when I want it to slow down. So let me just take a mental note of where this is, and then I'll demo how that works. Okay, so 1733. 1773. Okay, 1773. What frame does it say? But whatever. I'll try to remember. 1773. So if we take this time dilation and we move it really, really far, if we do this animation, you'll see it's just going to be in slow-mo for a really long time. So play, hit this K. It's just slow-mo the whole time, and it doesn't really hit, right? And we know that thrust in the air, that's like where the power's coming from. So to really slow it down, right before that hit, that's going to give that hit a little bit more oomph. So let's play it again with it changed. So we slow down right before, that way when she starts moving up, it just punches. So slow down, boom, and it gives that speed. And that's really what I'm looking for at that moment, is to really draw from sort of the power, this like, oh, I'm going down into the system and pulling out from it. So that little time dilation really helps with that. And then of course we get this other particle system. So let's go into that. And this is this effect that's kind of really happening to circle around the mech suit, right? Because I'm imagining once you pull in the energy, there's a secondary force that's actually like changing the matter. And this is that. This is like the matter that's changing in a circular pattern. And so that one is happening here. And this is another one of those time controlled. So it starts generating here and then stops generating here. And then to add a little bit more strength to this power, right? Because it's funny, even though this is like a video game and like there's not a camera, it's crazy how many times to make something feel real, you have to pretend that there's actually a camera there. Especially too with lighting. Like a lot of games will have like lens flares and like dirty lens overlays, and it's like, well, we're kind of actually literally simulating the fact that this character is being recorded through a camera. But aside from that, using camera tricks helps the realism. And so because this is such a powerful thing, if there was a camera there, even if it was like on a boom or a person, and there's this much energy going on, the camera would shake, right? So we got to have a camera shake in there. So basically to do that, it's the same thing, right? We have a little notify at the point we want the camera to shake, right? At the very top, when the energy is at its fullest, there's a wave that hits the camera. So we can go into that blueprint as well. So annoying. I don't know what's going on, but like I keep losing these menus. It is so annoying. You'll just have to trust me. There is a camera shake class that you can call here, and you can define all those camera shake classes. And so basically you just declare the frequency, the amount of shake, and all that. And then the last one is this particle system that just happens at the very end. The thought behind this is that this circle that she's just created has to dematerialize the same sort of way the armor is. So on this, we're using the torus location. From what I understand, this is the location at which the particles are spawning. So it's the surface of a torus shape. And I wanted that to kind of get the ring, because I want it to mimic the outer ring that is spawning, that's the animated. And we'll see that in action. And then using some force stuff. Niagara's really fun with the forces that you can add to the different particles. So without going too far into it, there's sort of a vortex to get it to spin. There's a gravity to make sure that like, and that's what's cool too, is you can say when the gravity kicks in. So there's no gravity in the beginning because it's just sort of this ephemeral thing. But then as it becomes more real, we kick in the gravity. The drag is just to kind of help keep the place of the particles while there's a bunch of force. So as we can see, there's a lot of drag in the beginning, and then we take that drag out, and we can kind of see that happening with the way the particle is emitting. So here there's not a lot of drag, and it's staying to the place. It's sort of sticking to the place of its initial spawn. And as time goes, it's like, oh, there's not as much drag, and then the curl noise really kicks in. And that's essentially what you're seeing right there. And then, of course, there's some change in color over lifetime, and then a sprite render. So if you wanted different types of sprites, you can always change that here. There's lots of tutorials on how to get good at Niagara, and I'm literally just scraping the surface. So just kind of trying to play with things as I go along. But it's very, very useful. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the particles in Maya. And that's what's happening at this point. So when that kicks in, you can see boop, boop. And altogether, that kicks in when this sort of circle goes away. It's like the dematerialize of that circle animation. So when we save that, we can look at it in action. And as we hit K, boom, we get that. Let's pull back a little bit. Oh, this is something that I had to spend so much time trying to figure out. So here is a little nugget secret of gold. There is probably somebody watching this that's like, duh, but it took me so long to figure this out. So in ALS, there's this really nice camera system that's going on that handles a lot of the shake and the movement between animations. But something as simple as just deciding how far away you want the camera to be was really hard for me to figure out. So if you just go into content, search camera, and you go into this ALS camera manager, I've set up a little hacky thing. There's probably a better way to do this, but I finally figured out how to do it, and it just saves me so much time. So at this point, step 5, when it calculates the camera's location and gets the pivot location and applies the camera relative offset. So what I understand this is doing, it sets a target, which is probably the pawn of some sort. But as I go through, there's these sockets. I don't know where these sockets are, but ultimately I know kind of what it's doing. So it's finding a target actor and then giving a relative space between that target actor and the camera actor. So I found where it happens without it being super buggy. And the reason is you can do it up here, but there's these like smoothing calculations that are going on up here. And if you try to multiply that value before the smoothing, it gets really ugly and gross. So at this point, right before we go into this sort of calculation in this lerp vector, back into the target camera location, you can multiply this vector to change the place of the camera actor. And so right now I made this a variable because I'm calling to it during different levels and different times to change where the camera is. But I guess just for the sake of this demo, I'll show you where I'm doing that. Oh, wait, I'm doing that in the level blueprint at this point because I want different levels to have different cameras, I think. I'm trying to remember. Blueprints, level blueprint. Is that where I'm doing that? I have to double check. Oh, there we go. Yep, right there. So if we want the camera to be further out, let's just do something like 1. It'll be really far out. But you'll be able to see the particle system work a little better. So now when we press play, now our camera is further out. And let's go a little bit further out because I want to be able to see the entire system. And that's something I think I'm going to work on too, is I'll do a notify. Maybe we'll just do that. I'm trying to decide. I'll just demo this for now. I'm not sure if I want to get into that rabbit hole. But I think at some point I might want to just do one of those timelines to have the camera pan out during the particle effect, because that actually might be kind of cool. But I will figure that out later, because I am resisting feature creep like crazy. I want to add so many features, but my goal is to get this out so we can have people alpha test this. So let's see. This should be a little bit further away. So we can hopefully see the whole particle system. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so let's hit K and we'll kind of take a note of the pause, the time dilation right before the thrust in the air, and when we hit the air we should get a nice little camera shake. Boom. There we go. So that is really kind of the basics of what's going on so far with this camera system, or I mean the particle system, sort of mixed with the controls. So we'll see it one more time just to, with the pause, the particles, and then the camera shake, and then the dematerialize of the base ring. There we go. And then I'll just keep kind of playing and keep showing you more. I've got a bunch of different videos for things like her new outfit, as well as some other things that are in the works right now. And at this point, I'm going to sign off, and I'll keep updating everyone on weird things that I decide to add into this game. Till next time, peace.